Sign language interpreters as linguistic descriptivists. We as sign language interpreters are exposed to language variation on a daily basis. Interpreters and programs that support interpreter education must cooperate with the deaf community in order to adapt to the evolving stylings of the native signers. And we must do this in order for professional communication to take place. But how do we look at language? We can divide this into two groups of people, prescriptivists and descriptivists. The prescriptivist approach to language is with a predetermined notion of what rules ought to govern a language. So they choose how they think communication should take place. However, these rules are often taken from supposedly a superior form of a language. For instance, they look at English and they decide if they want to use the word fewer as opposed to less, if they want to use from and not than. They determine from a predetermined notion what rules govern the language, what rules they're supposed to use. However, descriptivists, on the other hand, approach language variation as it occurs in actual discourse. This is how we usually communicate on a daily basis when the language is in motion. So instead of seeking to impose rules on language on some predetermined agenda or formula, descriptivists simply observe without judgment how the language is being used by the native speakers and then work to suit, rather than assuming that one way is superior to another. Descriptivists note that all varieties of language and communication operate based on different complex rules. So which approach really works better? The descriptivist approach usually works better for communication based on the fact that once the language is in motion, then it begins to unravel and you're better able to understand what is happening while it is in progress. Simply put, you can't have a predetermined notion of what is supposed to come without being fully in the actual context in itself for an accurate conveying of the message to occur. This happens throughout American Sign Language and various sign languages when placed either in a formal or an informal setting where communication obviously is what is supposed to take place or transpire. So let's talk about the deaf factor. What is this deaf factor? Simply put, this is what the deaf community requires. This is what they really want. They want to be able to access communication, and they want to be able to communicate and be understood, and for the interpreters to convey accurately what is being said. They choose and they determine what style they want to use, and they determine ongoing into the conversation how they would present their stylings of communication. Interpreters as linguists. Sign language interpreters really should act as linguistic descriptivists. That is, Interpreters should look at the language that is used by the native signers, which is the deaf community, and attempt to emulate that language in their target language production. So we as interpreters need to understand the language. We need to connect the language with the deaf community, and accurate communication is vital when relaying this information. So we can't always have predetermined notions and use that, but it has to be something that's ongoing and very descriptive once communication starts. Descriptivism as a route to language respect. Interpreters must remain rooted in the deaf community first and foremost. This is the only way we would know what their needs are and what style they prefer, what communication they prefer. The language we use is not really to be preserved for ourselves according to a set of rules that we prefer. Rather, sign language is a living language belonging to the community we serve. So this linguistic approach is an opportunity to observe and to learn from each other. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that communication takes place, and that when that happens, that the deaf community is satisfied with the approach that we use.